I was going to do this yesterday, and I know to the dismay of everyone in this body, we didn't get a good chance to talk about the financial package. But I thought the debate was already getting a little too taxing yesterday, so I decided to wait till today, because it is a new day, and I know it's a new day because actually my prepared remarks, the first thing I was going to say yesterday was I agree with most of the things Representative Lambert said to start this debate, but I don't feel that way today. You know, I love America, and I love North Carolina, and you know that love comes from the American dream, and that American dream is that regardless of the status of your birth, your possibilities are limitless here. In other words, I love America because of opportunity, and opportunity is absolutely everything, but opportunity isn't free, and it's not guaranteed. And so the duty of this body is to ensure that everyone in North Carolina, that we are delivering that opportunity to everybody. So let's talk taxes. Unfortunately, the tax policies in this budget don't rise to the occasion of the real opportunities in the moment that we're in right now. The tax proposal proposed in this budget will reduce our revenues by over $8.6 billion in the next 5 years. And I'll even give you the first year. You know, as Representative Zoka said, most of the first year cost is bills we've already voted on. And so excluding this year, it's going to cost over $7 billion in those previous four years. And we have to remind ourselves, that's assuming nothing bad happens, like a recession. And so from the perspective from our state's coffers and our state's financial position, you know, we were actually incredibly lucky that the pandemic didn't have a bigger impact. And we are in a much better position than even I hoped for. But like I said, a lot of it is luck. You know, we're lucky that the federal aid came through, and that helped us out a lot. We're lucky that the pandemic didn't really hurt our high-income earners and didn't really disrupt their day-to-day jobs. And so our income tax revenues didn't really hurt. And we're also lucky that the Supreme Court came down with the Wayfair decision, which allowed taxing for internet sales tax, which again, this body passed last year. And so when everyone shifted from brick and mortar stores during the pandemic to buying things online, we were able to capture that tax revenue. And so our sales tax revenue didn't really fall. And so we've heard a lot of how the tax policies in the past 10 years have laid the foundation for where we are right now, but we have to think about this. You know, when we look at say, okay, well, look how good financial we are, that's because of our tax decisions. But the state that was in almost equally good position as us was California. And I often hear from across the aisle how their tax policies are absolutely miserable, versus when we look at other conservative states like Florida, they were suffering. And so it's just a combination of all those things I mentioned before, plus the mix of our industries, that they weren't really hurt. And we got to think to ourselves, where did those industries come from? Our status as a financial sector did not start in 2010. Our status as a healthcare and IT leader in Research Triangle Park did not start in 2010. Hearing the debate yesterday about these tax policies, it's almost as if we were this third world smoldering wreckage in 2010. The clouds parsed, and Tom Tillis appears holding these tax cuts to rescue us all. But that's not true. We were in good shape before because we invested in our people for decades. Tax cuts didn't build RTP. Tax cuts did not transfer us into the second largest financial sector in the country. And I know the Great Recession hit us hard. It was a financial crisis. And we were the second largest financial system in the country, financial banking system in the country. And so it's going to hit us hard. And so our recovery was always going to be tough. But what our pandemic has revealed in these past couple years was that there were a multitude of structural flaws in our system. And with the help of some of our reserves and the federal aid, we've been able to plug some of these holes. But for us to be able to weather the potential storms coming up, we have to take this opportunity to make long-term, lasting investments in the foundation of our economy so that we can not only continue the high living standards of a lot of the people in our state, but also make that sustainable. And sustainability is the biggest thing. You know, I hate taxes. Who does like taxes? I hate paying them. I hate doing a lot of things. I hate paying my bills too. But I like air conditioning and I like cable. But I also hate driving around my district and seeing schools that are bursting at the seams, but my county government simply not even having enough money to pay for the land for new schools. And I hate driving through the downtrodden parts of Charlotte, seeing people so unbelievably close to the epicenter of economic growth and wealth in our state and not being able to grasp it. And I hate driving back to my old original hometown of Alexander County, from Taylorsville originally, and seeing this small rural community that's being left behind by globalization, technology, and even our state. These parts of our state have been aching for investments to give their communities a chance at the future. And I wish our tax cut philosophy works. No one more than me wishes that the trickle-down economic, the supply-side economics works. And while the anecdotal evidence and rankings from Forbes and CNBC suggest that we're number one in the country for business in terms of states, you know, the long-term data just doesn't back that up. Those rankings suffer from the same kind of long-term flaw that our current corporate outlook looks like, where they're only looking towards the next quarterly report. They're only looking and saying, what do we need to do to make sure our stock price is rising in the next quarter? And that's not the decisions we need to be making. Just go back to the American Legislative Exchange Council, ALEC, and how they rank how our priorities have changed. You know, we went from the middle of the pack to number 2 a couple years ago. Followed all their restrictions, lowered our tax rates, lowered regulation, did what we were supposed to do, and then they also have a growth record of how is that performance actually being realized 5 years later, 10 years later. And we are still middle of the pack. You know who's number 1? California. And when we look at what we've done in this state in the past 10 years, we've gone from the high of our neighbors, we've gone from the highest personal income tax to the lowest, aside from Tennessee, who had 0 and remains at 0. And in corporate, we went from by far the highest corporate income tax to the lowest, to by far the lowest. South Carolina is more than double the corporate income tax than us. But what have been those benefits? Well, during that time period, we've grown slower than the United States as a whole. And that's not just, well, we had a big hole to dig out of from the Great Recession. Well, that means we should have been growing faster. That's catch-up growth. But from 2008 to 2018, grew slower than the country. 2015 to 2018, grew slower than the country. Even 2018, we grew slower. Where did I get those numbers? John Locke. Their foundation gave us those numbers. We've grown slower than Georgia. We've grown slower than Tennessee. And dear God, we've grown slower than South Carolina. And so we talk a lot about funding, and we put a lot of money in this budget. But the reality is, in the end, we can still do a ton more. We can still do so much more. And that even after the amendments we tried to process yesterday, even after that, we would have had $2.8 billion in reserves. That's this year. You know, the reserves this year becomes the starting point for next year. And the reserves next year would have been about $1.9 billion. That's almost $1 billion difference. And so it doesn't take a great deal of quantitative insight to see that that is a rapidly decreasing number. And I think everyone could agree with this budget that we made investments we needed to make. And we want to be able to continue to make those investments. But we also need to realize we were dealing with unprecedented amount of money from the federal government, from the fact that we did not have a budget last year. And so our ability to maintain that level of spending is going to be threatened. Which is why I am so hesitant and so worried about these tax cuts that we're providing. Not only is that it's going to enable our ability to continue the investments that we should be making, but that the tax cuts don't seem to be delivering what we're promising. And what it does do is it continues to put more pressure on our local governments, who have quite a bit fewer levers they can pull in terms of revenue. Over the past 10 years, county property taxes across the state per capita, per person, have gone up over 26%. Tax raises, because they're having to fund things that our state should be funding. My home county, Mecklenburg County, over 20% of our $2 billion budget goes to education and health care That's operating expenses, things the state should be covering. Wake County is 26%. Durham County is 33%. So I don't have any numbers for the more redder counties. I don't have any colleagues in there to get those numbers for me. But it puts that pressure, and then our wealthier counties, like Mecklenburg, are able to do that. In terms of actual county property tax increases, Mecklenburg's at the lower end of the barrel. Looking around Mecklenburg, Iredell County, 33% increase in property taxes. Alexander County, 37%. Gaston County, 31%. Cabarrus County, 41%. And what this does is it even furthers the urban-rural divide that we've been dealing with here. And the state is the only body that can really help that. And so when we look at our big and wealthy counties, we can somewhat survive. But when you look at Charlotte and the Triad and the Triangle, as we continue, and I think everyone can agree, as they continue to become more regional powers, they simply do not have the tax base to invest in what they need, especially when most of the people who work in that area live in the adjoining counties. And in the same vein, it's our rural areas that are getting hurt the most because they need these opportunities. They need our help to invest so they can prepare their communities for the future. And that's why since I've gotten here, I have screamed for a statewide school bond, which I know is going to disproportionately benefit rural areas. Because that's how statewide spending works. The wealth comes from the wealthy areas, and we give it to the areas that need it. Because I know that is how our growth is going to continue. 66% of our population growth in the past 10 years has come from out of state. To say, what's the best way to build a sports team? Not through free agency. You do it through the draft. You home grow your own talent. And I feel that we are relying on other states to provide the talent that we need. Again, when we look at the economic growth in our state, where's it coming to? It's coming to our large urban centers. And we're the ones who are saying we do not need to cut taxes. Again, I worked in tax planning. I talked to CEOs. I talked to my old partners at Ernst & Young, We say, after the federal government came out with what's called base erosion and profit shifting regulations, where you can no longer have shell corporations to store your taxes, you have to have what's called boots on the ground. People have to want to live where they're located, where the business is located. And once that happened, the priority of tax planning plummeted. Because you want good communities. You need workers. Your workers want good schools. Your workers want clean air. Your workers want good transportation. They don't want traffic. They want affordable housing. And we have the ability to deliver that for everybody, and sustain it. And the real worrisome thing about this tax package is a lot of it, the corporate income tax falls, the big income tax falls, they don't even hit for a couple years after this biennium. And so it looks like we can easily fund everything we want to fund. But then the taxes are going to hit. And so we got to look at ourselves and say, are we providing the opportunity we need to for our state? No, we're not doing good enough. And so we can afford to do better. We can afford to do better today. We have the funds to. And we can afford to make that sustainable. Again, the biggest threat to our capitalist system is the lack of opportunity. Lack of opportunity and feeling left behind is dangerous. That's what's causing the great divide in our politics right now. That's what's causing the urban-rural divide. And we have the ability to come together. There's rural poor, there's urban poor. And demagoguery can pull them in different ways, and it leads to the politics of hate. But we have the ability to end that. We have the ability to bring that together. But we got to invest in our people. And we got to keep investing in our people. So please, vote against this budget. Let's get one that works for everybody.